In this video we're going to be looking at building and using triggers within the SAP HANA Studio. So to do this we need to launch our SAP HANA Studio, and we need to make sure that a certain perspective again is open. If you want to follow along and do this, all you need to do is on the top right hand side select Open Perspective, select Other, and just make sure that the Administration Console perspective is selected by default. So if I expand my database, expand my catalog, we have here a schema called STS. If I expand the schema, all triggers that we create will be stored in this folder called triggers. So the example we're going to do is as follows. If I expand the table, the tables within the STS schema, you can see that we've got a table here called dim customer. In this example, what we're going to do is that if anyone enters a new record into the dim customer table, I want to know the date it was entered and who entered it. I'm not really concerned about what they've entered. I just want to know when anyone uses or inserts a row in this record, in this table, I want to know when a record's been entered. So to do this, we need to build a trigger. So to do this, I'm going to click on my system and click on a SQL editor. So it's very simple to do. The first thing we need to do is write the create trigger statement. So that will be create trigger. Then we need to give our trigger a name. So I'm going to call mine STS dot, because I want it in the STS schema, STS trigger. So that's the command to create your trigger. Then in this simple example, we're going to decide on when we want the trigger to fire. So I'm going to say after inserting on a specific table. So after insert on this table, which is the dim customer table. And then I'm going to specify for each row. Again, these triggers can be very, very complex, but I want to keep it as simple as possible to start off with. When we've got that, we then need to decide what we want to do. So we enclose this syntax within a begin statement and an end statement. So in between will be what happens when someone inserts a record in the dim customer table, and it will do this for each row. So to see if this works, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new table by right-clicking on our tables folder and selecting new table. We then need to give the table a name. So I'm going to call this one STS Audit. We then need to decide on the column name. So I'm going to call the first one, it's simply going to be a timestamp. So I'm going to call this STS timestamp. And I'll make the data type a timestamp data type. There we go. And then I'm going to add another column. And this one is going to be called user. So I'll call this STS user. And this will be a varchar 50. There we go. So we've got STS timestamp and STS user. So then I will execute. And there we go, we've got that new table. So now what we need to do is test adding rows to that table. I would advise doing this before you actually go and enter the syntax into the trigger. So again, I'm going to click my database and click on the SQL editor. So the command that we will want to execute is insert into the name of that audit table, and then we want to insert specific values. The values are, in brackets, current timestamp, and with a comma, current user. There we go. So we're basically inserting the timestamp and the user of the person who's connected within the connection into that audit table. So if I execute this, we've entered some records into that audit table. So if I go to open content, we'll see that we've inserted one row at a specific time. I'll just execute it again to test. There we go, second time. And again, I'll do a open content, and there should be now 2 records in that table. Perfect. So now that we know that that syntax works, we can then take this syntax, copy it, and then apply it to the trigger. So again, I'm going to close these 2 windows and then insert it between the begin and the end parts of the trigger statement. So essentially now, whenever we enter a row into that dim customer table, we'll get the timestamp, the user, and also we can get, if we want, the primary key of the customer. All of that's also possible. So now that we've got that, I can execute to create that trigger. So I'll just put a semicolon at the end of the SQL statement. So again, just to confirm what we've got, the first line gives us the create statement. The second line determines when we want the trigger to activate, and then between the begin and the end statement we have the SQL that we want to be executed. Very simple. So now I'll type on execute, and then we can see if I refresh my list of triggers, the trigger has indeed been created. There we go, STS trigger. So now to test it. So if I now again open up the STS audit table, we can see we've got 2 rows. Now just to clean up the table, I'm going to drop all the values from that table, again using a SQL editor. So I'm going to type drop from the audit table. So that table now should be empty. Oh, not drop, sorry, delete from the audit table. So now if I was to look at the data in the STS audit table again, we can see that that table is indeed empty. So now we want to see if the trigger works. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the existing customer table, right click, and then open the content. Again, we want to add 1 row, so I'm just going to scroll to the end of this list of customers, select the last row, right click and say insert statement. This is a very simple way of me, a very lazy way of me to get the insert statement for that table. So again, I'm going to add on an extra row, so I'm just going to change the value to 124. So we're about to perform an insert statement on the dim customer table, and the test will be to see if there's any data within this STS audit table. Again, if I go to the content of that table, at the moment there's nothing there. If I now fire off this insert statement by clicking on execute, we can see that the execute statement happened. If I go to the dim customer table and I refresh the customer table and scroll to the end, we can see that we've added another row into the customer table, which is row number 124. And lastly, what I should see now, if I refresh this audit table, is that at a specific time, which was at nearly 11:15, the user called system, which is the user I've connected to this system with, as you can see here, executed a command on the dim customer table. Again, I'm going to go back to my SQL editor. I'll create another row, click on execute, refresh the audit table, and again what you should see is a second row is added. So that's a very simple way in which you can create triggers within the SAP HANA Studio.